Approximately a third of all human trafficking victims across the world are children. The vast majority are female. Final Vow movie is a harrowing look at an unspeakable reality. Sister Anne-Marie is no ordinary nun. She dedicates her life to caring for orphaned children and finding them loving homes. But her mission takes a darker turn when her work brings her face to face with the ruthless underworld of human trafficking. With the shadowy past herself, she uncovers a sinister web of corruption that threatens to destroy everything she holds dear. As her two worlds collide, the innocent children she protects and the ghosts of her past she can't outrun, she's tested to the limit. This gripping thriller took me on a rollercoaster of emotions right from the first scene. What really sets this film apart from the rest is that it incorporates AI to make your viewing experience truly immersive. If you're like me, constantly wanting to ask questions and find out more throughout a film, you can do just that. Chat with the AI versions of the characters while you watch, like I did, to take your movie night to the next level. The best part is that this film is available exclusively on finalvow.com, so you don't even have to leave your sofa.
The Little Albert experiment, and it consisted of a 9-month-old baby. And in 1920, John B. Watson's study started. He studied behaviorism, but he was specifically drawn to the reason why certain kids, or just humans in general, have fear to specific things. And he was basically trying to see if he could make somebody have a phobia on purpose, on things that they would intuitionally wouldn't be afraid of. This is where we come to Little Albert. So first, he showed a puppy to the baby, and he doesn't really care too much of it. He shows him a rabbit, shows him a monkey, also a mouse, and he has no reactions. But then whenever he introduced these animals again, whenever the baby would touch it,
he would make like a scary noise or something, or
yeah, exactly. So there would be like a big ass metal pole, and with a hammer he would just boom. Every time the baby would touch it, slowly but surely, like, the baby would have a reaction. He was like traumatizing the kid the whole time. Like, the baby would start crying. He was trying to see exactly how much time it took for him to fully become scared of whatever he was trying to make him scared of. He was purposely trying to train the baby's mind to be scared of whatever he wanted him to be scared of.
What the fuck? That's fucked.
Also, they never found out how little Albert was put into this experiment. They don't know if he was like the mother.
You're not the victim in this offense. The victim of this offense is the child.
That's where I'm confused.
That's what we are talking.
The man you just saw in that video was Joshua A. Richardson. He's from Connecticut, and he was convicted of molesting his own nephew. So Joshua frequently looked after his 9-year-old nephew and his sister, and at one point the 9-year-old began to tell his mother that Uncle Josh had touched him in his private areas. Now, as it turns out, this boy's mother had gone to the police in the past, years prior, to allege the same things, that this guy had been touching her own son. Now, I don't know why the mother kept having him watch over her son. That's a whole different thing to discuss. But Josh was eventually arrested, tried for these crimes, found guilty. But as you can see in that sickening interrogation footage, he puts all the blame on the young child. If you watch the full clip, it's incredibly disturbing. He states he was confused. The young boy was sending him mixed signals. Now, let's keep in mind, this child was 9 years old. In my opinion, someone like this should be locked up and the key should be thrown away. They should never be out of prison. But as we all know with the American justice system, I'm sure that this guy will be out in a year or two back in his community, able to target, once again, whoever he wants to.
Sam Ballard was 19 years old with his whole life ahead of him. He was at a party with friends when a dare was thrown out in the air, and it was meant to be innocent and funny. But nobody had an idea of the horror that would follow. One friend spotted something moving near their feet, a small slimy garden slug, and dared Sam to eat it. Sam accepted and then swallowed the slug without hesitation. But lurking within that slug was something deadly. Days after the dare, Sam started feeling sharp pains in his leg and a burning ache that wouldn't go away. His family rushed him to the hospital, desperate for answers. Doctors soon discovered the cause, the rat lungworm. A rare parasite that normally affects rats but had found its way into the slug. Now it was inside Sam, burrowing through his body, infecting his brain and wreaking havoc. The parasite invaded Sam's nervous system, and Sam was soon thrashing in agony. His body wrecked by violent seizures, his skin pale and clammy, and as the parasite buried deeper into his brain, Sam slipped into a coma. For 420 days, Sam laid in a coma, his family helplessly watching as he became a shell of his former self. When he finally woke, he was no longer the same young man he was before. The infection had ravaged his body, leaving him quadriplegic, unable to walk, talk, or even feed himself. Every day was a battle against pain, infections, and complications that no one could have imagined. Sam fought for nearly 8 years, enduring unimaginable suffering before he passed away in 2018.
I don't think there's ever been a family with more skeletons in their closet and horrific dark secrets than the Murdaugh family. If you live in South Carolina and this was 5 years ago, you'd probably hear the name Alec Murdaugh and think of a powerful, well-respected attorney. But in reality, this man was straight diabolical. Not only did he steal millions of dollars from his law firm and clients, he then proceeded to secretly murder his own wife and son in a desperate attempt to gain sympathy and delay the investigation into what he was doing behind closed doors. This all played out in a way that made him the victim. He said that he just so happened to discover his wife and son killed, and at first people believed him. But the mystery would only deepen when just a few months later, Alec himself would be found shot in the head on the side of the road. He did survive this, and most would think that he was attacked too, just like his family. But it would later be proven that he tried to stage his own murder so that his surviving son could collect on a $10 million insurance payout. This is one of the most disturbing yet confusing cases I have ever read about, and the layers go so deep with this family that include a string of suspicious deaths all tied to them. If you want to learn about this case from the very beginning, then you should read this book. It's called Tangled Vines, Power, Privilege, and the Murdaugh Family Murders by John Glatt. He reconstructs the rise of the Murdaugh family and the double murder that would rock the community. If this case is confusing to you, but you still want to learn everything about it, I'd suggest starting here for a clear breakdown.
Catálogo de Televisa, or the Televisa catalog.
Oh, fuck, bro. I'm nervous, bro. Fuck.
So at first, this just started as just like a Twitter conspiracy, saying how Televisa had this catalog that they would show different actresses, different singers who were involved with Televisa.
Okay.
Mainly it was women. They would have different pictures of them.
Okay.
And it all started with a singer. Her name was Lucerita. That was the first picture that came out. And it just said that, oh, I think she was a virgin at the time. Basically what the Televisa catalog was
it like a catalog where people could find these people and have sexual acts with them?
yeah, you choose what girl you want and you would pay.
This is basically sex trafficking.
Yes, bro. Certain people started voicing shit on the news. There was this lady, her name was Alejandra Avalos. She's an actress, a singer, and she was also involved with Televisa. But in 2017, she ended up getting kicked out because she spoke up about it, saying how she was invited before. And I'm gonna show you the thing live where she was interviewed and shit.
Me habló una señora de las famosas representantes de artistas y me dijo que había un catálogo de Televisa, que si yo quería participar. Muy amablemente le dije que yo no me manejaba bajo esos estándares sexuales o de favores sexuales. Uno accediera. Ella me decía que había hasta $1,000,000 por noche.
She basically confirmed that there's some weird shit going on between like the women that work for Televisa.
What the fuck?
Yeah, bro.
The body of 22-year-old Riley Strain has just been found in the Cumberland River in West Nashville. This is what we know so far. Riley disappeared on March 8th after being kicked out of Luke Bryan's bar in downtown Nashville. This was at about 9:38 p.m., and according to the bar, during Riley's time there, he was only served 1 alcoholic beverage and 2 waters. Something happened that caused him to be kicked out, and a friend walked him out but returned to the bar. Riley disappeared shortly after, but he was seen on surveillance footage multiple times that night stumbling around. New body cam footage from a Metro police officer was recently released that showed Riley briefly interacting with a cop the night he disappeared. And the last known communication that he had was through a text with a woman that he had been talking to. The woman asked how he was doing, and he texted her back something along the lines of good or good luck, but the text was misspelled. Police started searching the Cumberland River after Riley's bank card was found on the embankment near the water. And sadly, at around 7:30 this morning, Riley's body was found. His body was found by a worker in the area, and authorities were able to identify him by his shirt and watch. He was found about 8 miles from downtown Nashville. Police say there were no obvious signs of trauma to his body or foul play, but his cause and manner of death is still pending until his autopsy is complete. According to authorities, based on Riley's height and weight, if he was in the water, he would have likely surfaced between 14 and 20 days. And today marks the 14th day. This is not the outcome that anyone was hoping for. All we can do now is keep his family in our thoughts and do whatever we can to help them get through this horrible tragedy.
This video footage of a survivor of a volcanic eruption is absolutely horrifying, and it shows the devastating impact that natural disasters like this can have on humans. On December 3rd, 2023, Mount Merapi in Indonesia erupted. This volcanic eruption sent ash over 10,000 feet into the air, and it covered a number of towns and cities nearby in a blanket of volcanic ash. Now, unfortunately, this eruption kind of came out of nowhere. So when this volcano erupted, there were 75 different people hiking on this mountain. 49 of those hikers that were present that day were evacuated, 3 of them were found alive and were rescued, and unfortunately, 24 of them died. Most of the fatalities were people that were hiking near the crater of the volcano, and the people that were found dead had suffered extreme burns to their extremities and their faces, which made identification of the bodies nearly impossible. Eerily, one group of hikers who survived the volcanic eruption reported that as they were hiking down the mountain that day, they didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. The volcano had already erupted behind them, but they hadn't heard anything, they hadn't seen anything. The only thing that his group noticed was a group of monkeys at the base of the mountain screaming frantically, as if they were trying to warn them that something bad was about to happen. If you want to listen to more true crime stories, listen to the podcast that I co-host with my wife Courtney, Murder in America. It's available on all streaming platforms, and I'm sure that you'll enjoy it.
These are people who died on live TV, and this one is absolutely gut-turning. Many of the deaths that we witnessed on live TV are the product of 24-hour news channels. Because all live news events are completely unwritten. Covering things like hostage crises, attacks, and high-speed chases are bound to go terribly wrong. And there's no telling when exactly this will happen. That's exactly what led to Fox News having to issue an apology on September 28, 2012. They were covering a high-speed chase in Arizona, and even the police backed off when they realized the danger. In place, they opted to plant undercover surveillance and tailed him from the sky in a helicopter. Jodan Romero already had a warrant out for his arrest when he stole an SUV at gunpoint earlier that morning. He weaved through traffic like a madman and sped down commercial areas and ran red lights. When he drove past a group of undercover officers, he opened fire on them through the driver's window. Some believe Jodan had a death wish himself. And finally, after hours, he appeared to have given up. He parked the SUV with the Fox News cameras zooming in on him. At this point, even the on-air reporter expressed concerns. Jodan then took off running and tumbled to the ground. He quickly jumped back to his feet and he was carrying something in his hand. You couldn't tell because of the camera angle, but it was a gun. He then walked towards some shrubbery and immediately unalived himself in the head, as hundreds of thousands of people watched. And obviously I can't show the video, but I'll show you a clip leading up to that exact moment.
Just not sure about this. He's getting things out of the vehicle, clearly. It doesn't appear that there's anyone else with him. Well, you know, you wait for the end of these things, and then you worry about how they may end. There's nobody else around him. This makes me a little nervous, I gotta tell you. No, get off it.
People are calling this the wildest self-defense claim they've ever seen. It was the 1980s in California. Betty Broderick and her husband Dan seemed to be the picture-perfect couple. Dan was a lawyer and Betty was a stay-at-home mum, dedicating her time to looking after their 4 children. They lived in a stunning home in a stunning neighborhood and lived a lifestyle most could only dream of. On their drive were an array of sports cars, and they were invited to all the most exclusive parties. However, beneath the surface, Betty was growing resentful. She recalls Dan being in charge of everything, and she hated the lack of freedom she had now that they were married. Betty and Dan would argue violently, and in one heated argument, Betty actually threw a stereo at him, knocking him unconscious. It was clear that they weren't happy, but apparently due to their Catholic upbringings, they didn't believe in divorce. Then in 1982, Dan hired 21-year-old Linda Kolkenna and appeared to be spending a lot of time with her separately. When Betty turned up at his work to surprise him for his birthday, she was enraged when the receptionist told her that Dan and Linda had actually gone out for the day together. In a rage, Betty set fire to some of Dan's clothes in their garden in full view of all of their children. This was the beginning of the end for the pair. Eventually, Dan filed for divorce and the pair battled over finances and custody of their children. This went on for 5 years, and obviously because Dan was a lawyer himself, Betty found it very difficult to find a lawyer who was willing to go up against him. He won sole custody of the children and he won the house. Betty felt she came out of the divorce at a real disadvantage. When things were finalised, Betty was so enraged that she actually drove her car into Dan's front door while their children were inside. Dan claimed she then grabbed a butcher's knife and he called the police. Eventually, Betty got placed into a psychiatric hospital for a little while. Dan actually finally admitted to having had an affair with Linda and the pair got married. Betty's behaviour, though, was escalating. She began harassing the pair, leaving them constant obscene answer phone messages. Things would come to a devastating end on the 5th of November 1989. At around 5 a.m, Betty took a key that she'd taken from her daughter and made her way to the pair's house in San Diego. She crept into their home with a revolver that she'd purchased months earlier. She entered the bedroom where the pair were asleep and shot at Linda. She shot her in the head and the chest, and Dan was hit in the chest when he was reaching for the phone. Tragically, the pair were killed. Dan was just about to turn 45 and Linda was just 28. In court, Betty tried to claim self-defense. She said that she'd taken the weapon there in order to make them listen to her. She also said she'd originally planned to unalive herself, but things just had gone wrong in the moment. Needless to say, the jury really didn't buy Betty's story, and in 1991 she was found guilty of 2 counts of murder. She was sentenced to 32 years in prison plus 2 years for firearms charges. She's now been denied parole 3 times for showing a lack of remorse.
Episode of Mujer Casos de la Vida Real. This one is specifically called La Muerte es Vecina. And in this episode, the main, antagonist is played by Maria Prado.
Yeah, she's been in a couple of those episodes.
In this episode, we're met with the woman, her name is Dora. She goes to her neighbor's house, who happens to be a retired nurse. And Dora, she specifically needs vitamin injections to help out with her diabetes. So she goes, it's a little bit weird because she has like a pet scorpion. She goes on to explain something that she did when she was a kid. And basically, she explains that she hates seeing other people happy. And she says it herself, it irritated seeing her grandmother happy because she has no reason to be happy. She leaves, she tells her husband, and her husband goes on to explain like, yeah, I have the same feeling, she's weird, we had a weird interaction, I don't want you going back to her anymore. And then she says, after the next injection, I'm never gonna see her again. She goes to get her injection. She gives her the vitamins that she needs, but she switches it with a different medication. And it turns out that she switched it out with the venom from the scorpion. She ends up butchering her body. And then the husband starts getting worried. It's been too long. Where the fuck is your mother? We need to go find her. He tells the cops what's going on, and they go raid the nurse's house. And as they're searching the house, you see dismembered body parts.
Yo, and keep in mind, guys, these stories are real life stories.
I was trying to say that, bro. Yeah.
So these were sent in from people.
The body of a missing Washington woman was just found at a cemetery in Mexico, and authorities say she was tortured. This is Reina Hernandez. She was 54 years old and lived in Renton, Washington when she disappeared on February 26th of this year. Her friends last spoke to her around 10 that morning, and Reina said that she was going to a home in South Renton to speak with her boyfriend of 30 years. When she didn't return home and failed to go in to open up her hair salon, her friends reported her missing on February 28th. During the investigation, police found evidence at the South Renton home where Reina was last seen that she was taken against her will and likely kidnapped, and her car was also missing. It seemed as if she disappeared into thin air, but on March 8th, Renton police came across a news article in Mexicali about an unidentified body that was found in a local cemetery near the Tijuana highway. After giving authorities in Mexico information about Reina, they were able to positively identify her as the woman found in the cemetery. Her body had signs of torture. Her hands and feet were bound, she had been shot in the head, and she was wrapped in a blanket. Her car was also located nearby. A 61-year-old Renton man was arrested on unrelated charges, but is currently a suspect in the case. The man's name hasn't been released publicly, but according to Reina's family, he was her partner. Authorities believe that this was a domestic violence incident, as clients of hers from the salon reportedly stated that Reina did experience domestic violence, and even had a black eye before going missing. Right now, police are trying to figure out when and where she was killed, because if she was killed in the US, they are seeking to extradite the suspect. Reina was described as hardworking, empathetic, and she had a lot of love in her heart. Her family has since created a GoFundMe to help bring her body back to the US and to cover other expenses, so I'll include that here.
Imagine getting stuck in your own house and dying. Well, this is one of the worst deaths imaginable, explained. This is 38-year-old Mariessa Weber, who lived in Florida. She was a very petite person who was 5'3" and just under 100 pounds.
On the evening of October 28th, 2006, Mariessa would return home, say hello to her mother, and then go into her room like she always does. But then she was never seen again. The next morning, her mother realized she was gone, and her sister didn't hear from her. Nobody that she knew seen her or heard from her either. They searched the entire house and even her bedroom, but they didn't find her. So she was then reported as missing to the police department. People were thinking maybe she got kidnapped, maybe she fell into the wrong crowd. The issue with that was there was no forced entry into the home. There were no signs of forced entry into her bedroom. There was no signs of altercation that took place. It's literally as if she just vanished into thin air. A couple days would go by and the mother and sister would start to smell very bad smells throughout the house. They blamed this on rats that might have gotten stuck in the walls and died. Several more days would pass and the smell would keep getting worse and worse. The sister then goes into Mariessa's room once more and begins to look around, when she suddenly noticed something strange behind the bookshelf. Towards the higher part of the shelf, she noticed something that appeared to look like a human toe. The smell got worse as she approached the bookshelf and she then looked behind it, and she then noticed her sister. Mariessa was hanging upside down from this bookshelf and she was dead. Mariessa never left the house. She wasn't missing. For 12 whole days, she was stuck behind a bookshelf hanging upside down. It was determined that she was died from positional asphyxiation, which is when your body is upside down and it's not getting the oxygen it needs, and all of the blood is rushing towards your head and you eventually pass out. Now, nobody knows how long she was alive while she was in this position. Some people have lost consciousness between 40 and 60 seconds in this position. And some people have been able to stay in that position for hours before they were rescued or before they died. But at least for a few minutes, Mariessa was in extreme pain, and she was probably calling for help, but somehow in some way, nobody heard her. This death is something straight out of a nightmare, and may Mariessa Weber rest in peace.
Hyde Police Headquarters, the center of one of the biggest ever police search operations in this country, and it's collecting evidence which might confirm the killings of young children up on the Pennine Moors about 7 or 8 miles from here.
Could this be the last search for Keith Bennett? Once again, forensic officers are combing through the earth of this infamous moor. They are looking for 12-year-old Keith, who went missing in 1964. He is the only victim of Myra Hindley and Ian Brady, who has never been found.
The series of brutal murders, which saw the two exclusively target children, earned these two the nickname the most hated couple in England.
The area where they assaulted, murdered and buried these children is known as Saddleworth Moor.
Even as a child, Ian Brady was regarded as a secretive outsider. Born in one of the roughest slums in Glasgow, he grew up with an interest in sadism, but after meeting Myra Hindley, that escalated.
Often what's motivating the killer couple is something that psychologists call a folie à deux, literally a madness shared by two.
Their killing began with 16-year-old Pauline Reed, lured into Hindley's car and taken to the moor to meet Brady. Pauline was murdered and buried there.
She's not suffering now. Nobody can hurt her now. Feel her that close now, you see, so that seems to put me up a lot. I feel her so close to me. I miss her very much, I still do.
Next came 12-year-old John Kilbride, a clever young man, good at football. John Kilbride had been lured into Myra Hindley's van and driven to the moor. His body would not be found for another 2 years. He'd been sexually assaulted and strangled.
It wasn't a good time, that 2 years. A big relief when he was found.
10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey's voice was recorded by Brady as she begged in vain for her life. When he and Hindley finally came to court, such details provoked an outrage.
I have always been implacably opposed to capital punishment, but I would have made an exception in the cases of these two.
Saddleworth Moor has been the focus of searches for Keith over the last nearly 6 decades. Brady was even brought onto the moors to show officers the graves of his victims. The bodies of 3 of them were discovered, but neither Brady or Hindley would say where Keith Bennett was buried before they died. His mother, Winnie, fought tirelessly to find her son.
I will never give up, never in a month Sunday. If it takes me to my grave, I'll carry on till then.
Before she passed away 10 years ago, never knowing where her child was hidden.
Hindley, who said that she had a sore throat, gave her evidence in a low, husky voice. She said that she had loved Brady and still loved him.
After 5 decades, the question as to where he buried the body of 12-year-old Keith Bennett remains. If his poor health is now as bad as he suggests, will Brady go to his grave without revealing that last sad secret?
This model's body was found floating in her pool. Police had to work out if this was a tragic accident or a callous murder. Samira Frash was a 38-year-old French model who lived a lavish lifestyle in Golden Eagle in Florida. Now, those who knew Samira were envious. Not only was she absolutely stunning, but she was also extremely successful and had a lot of money. She had a life that most others could only dream of. That was until the 22nd of February 2014. Her body was discovered by a handyman and his son floating in her garden swimming pool. Now, the pair who found her were obviously completely horrified by this and immediately rang 911. Now, when officers arrived initially, it wasn't quite clear whether the model had been murdered or whether she'd just accidentally fallen in and drowned. What they did notice was that Samira's sandals were in the pool, and interestingly, one was tucked under a hose that was in the water. Investigators would need to examine Samira's life in more detail in order to understand her death. Now, Samira had actually come from quite humble beginnings. She was born into poverty, but then became famous due to her beauty. She made a name for herself walking in catwalks in Paris and met a man who caught her eye in 2006. This was Dr. Adam Frash, a podiatrist. The pair fell in love straight away and ended up getting married in Vegas. They then bought a house together in Florida and went on to have 2 daughters together. As I said before, they lived a lavish lifestyle and they looked to the outside world like a really happy couple. However, it would all come crashing down after the discovery of Samira's body. Investigators realised the evidence didn't quite match with an accidental drowning theory. Samira's sandals were in the pool and they had straps on them that weren't just able to kind of fall off your feet. Why were her shoes in the pool and not attached to her? Then there was a damning report from the medical examiner. The cause of death was blunt force trauma. Now, initially you might think, okay, well, she could have done that falling into the pool and smacking her head on the side. In fact, the evidence suggested she'd got blunt force trauma on both sides of her skull. This was unlikely to happen from a fall unless she obviously fell, hit one side of her head, then got back up again and then fell again and hit the other side of her head. And again, that still doesn't explain why her strappy sandals were suddenly off her feet. Investigators needed to look at the CCTV in order to rule out the handyman and his son. The tape did actually show that they were telling the truth. They'd simply got there a few minutes before finding her and then immediately called 911. So did Samira have any enemies? In fact, her husband's friend Kendale admitted to police that the pair had never got on. He said she really didn't like how much time he spent with Adam and the fact that the pair used to go off to casinos quite a lot. However, that didn't really seem like a motive for Kendale to then go and murder her. It also turned out he had a really strong alibi on that day. Police then interviewed Adam, the husband. Interestingly, he told them on the day before her death, she'd actually come to him and told him how exhausted she was and she needed a break. He very kindly and selflessly, he said, offered to take the kids to their beach house 3 hours away. He claimed that the morning of her death, he left the house at around 8 a.m. with the children. However, it turned out Adam wasn't quite as selfless and kind as he made out. It turned out the pair had not been getting on very well at all and were filing for a divorce. Adam had allegedly been having affairs behind his wife's back. Not only that, but there had been some really serious incidents between the pair. There was a disturbing history of DV between the two, and Samira had even been arrested for domestic battery against him. Adam had visible scratches on his face, and then one man even came forward to police to state that Adam had actually confessed to killing his wife to him. The case went to trial and it took just 90 minutes for the jury to convict him of murder. He was given life in prison.
Hammer coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
£87 million worth of substances and 2 dead bodies were discovered in a submarine. The Colombian Navy recently intercepted a submarine and found 2 deceased men, 2 men on the verge of death, and over 2,000 kilos of substances on board. It's believed that the submarine had malfunctioned as it had a huge amount of water inside. The 2 survivors needed urgent medical attention, presumably due to the inhalation of toxic fumes caused by fuel issues. These narco subs are commonly used by substance traffickers, and the Colombian naval officers came across the boat while patrolling the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Colombia.
I died after falling from the 5th floor while cheating on my wife. My name is McKevin and I'm a famous 23-year-old Brazilian rapper. In 2021, I was married to Dielene Bezerra. However, just 2 weeks after my wedding, I propositioned a top model named Bianca Dominguez to have a threesome with a friend of mine in exchange for $380. While we were in the hotel room with Bianca Dominguez, we had consumed a lot of alcohol and began doing what we had planned. My friend was supposed to join us, but at the last moment, Bianca changed her mind. In the midst of it all, I received a message from my bodyguard informing me that my wife was looking for me in the hotel. So, I went out onto the balcony and tried to escape by hanging from it, attempting to reach the room below to avoid being seen by my wife while I was naked. Unfortunately, I fell from the 5th floor while trying to make my escape. The firefighters arrived quickly, but I died from my injuries in the rescue vehicle. Perhaps I shouldn't have cheated on my wife.
After watching this video, you might never go into the ocean again. Okay, so we all know how sharks are one of the most terrifying parts of the ocean. And it's a big reason people don't go in because they don't want to get attacked by a shark. But what if I told you every time you're in the ocean, you're actually swimming right next to sharks and you don't even know it? Sharks have enormous ranges and can cover great distances with ease, which means they can surprise beachgoers anywhere along the coast at any time. They can be seen in depths as low as 3 meters or 20 to 30 feet from shore, which is just crazy if you think about it. Most attacks happen in 6 to 10 feet water, but they rarely attack humans. But here's the video showing how close sharks get to humans when they're at the beach. And you might never go again after seeing it. This is the scariest story about I'm Sorry Mommy. One night, a woman was in the kitchen reading a newspaper when she suddenly looked up and saw her 6-year-old son staring at her. She said, "Something wrong, dear?" "I had a nightmare," said the boy, "and I can't sleep." "Well, don't worry, you're safe now," said the mother. "I dreamed I was in bed and heard a sound in Daddy's room," he said. "And when I looked in the door, I saw 2 big black things with white eyes. It came out of the closet and it attacked Daddy." "Don't worry," said the mother in a soothing voice. "It was just a dream. It didn't really happen." The boy then continued saying they ripped him into pieces and then ate him after. "And they even licked the blood off the floor. I thought if I ran away they wouldn't catch me. But they did. They were going to eat me, but they stopped and said, they wouldn't eat me if I promised to..." "To what?" said the mother. "Promise to distract you while they creep up behind you." "I'm sorry, Mommy," said the boy as the mother heard the floorboards behind her creak. The boy then watched with enjoyment as his mother was ripped apart piece by piece, with a giant smile on his face.
This man allegedly shot and killed a man before returning to his date inside a restaurant. Eric Aguirre from Texas was arrested after allegedly shooting and killing a man who was impersonating a parking ticket attendant. He apparently returned inside to his date and told her everything was fine. 29-year-old Eric and his date had parked their cars outside a burger restaurant. This is when a man called Elliot Nix approached them to ask them for $20 each to park their cars. It's believed that Eric went ahead and paid the $40 to park the cars. However, when he went inside the restaurant, he found out that this had been a scam. Eyewitnesses reported seeing Eric sprint out of the restaurant to his car and grab a weapon. He was seen chasing the fake parking attendant and shooting him. Eric was taken to the hospital where he was pronounced dead. Now, Eric returned to his date, but the pair decided to go somewhere else to eat, and according to court documents, the date continued well into the evening. He was arrested at a later stage and charged with murder, and his date voluntarily came forward a couple of days later to provide information.
I transmitted HIV and hepatitis B to all my patients by neglecting the cleaning of my equipment.
I am Scott Harrington, an experienced and renowned dentist. I earned my Doctor of Dental Medicine degree and opened my own dental practice, where I treated thousands of patients over the years. However, in 2013, my career was marked by a major scandal. My dental office was inspected by health authorities after a patient was diagnosed with a hepatitis C infection. Investigators discovered several violations of hygiene and infection control standards in my practice. I was accused of endangering the health of my patients by using non-sterilized instruments, performing procedures that did not adhere to safety standards, and having staff not trained in proper hygiene practices. As a result, thousands of patients were urged to get tested for hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and HIV. Following this investigation, my dental license was temporarily suspended, and I faced legal action for medical negligence. I was deeply disturbed and shocked by these accusations, as I never had the intention of harming my patients. After a long legal battle, I eventually succeeded in regaining my dental license and reopening my practice in 2018.
This ex-fashion model was found dead at the side of the road. 47-year-old Rebecca Landreth worked for years as a successful fashion model, and she was also a great violinist. She was a finalist in the 2014 Miss Manhattan contest and America's It Girl Miss Lady Liberty. On February the 7th, 2021, in Union County, Pennsylvania, her body was discovered. A PennDOT worker discovered her body on the side of the road, and she had gunshot wounds to her neck. She also had wounds to her head, chest, and hand. The police shut down the area as they searched for evidence. Her face was so damaged it was hard to identify her at first. Rebecca had actually become estranged from her family and was travelling around under a different name. She'd been hitchhiking with truck driver Tracy Rollins, and it was actually a note in her pocket that led police to him. When they found him, they found the murder weapon, blood evidence, and bone fragments. He'd shot her 26 times, and he said this was to ensure that she was definitely dead and no longer suffering. Although he had made a poor attempt to clean up the crime scene, he hadn't done enough to conceal his guilt. He admitted to this hideous crime and will spend between 40 and 80 years in prison.
I saved my mom by stabbing my dad 4 times. The incident happened in France, in the Gers, when I was just 9 years old. Very often my parents would argue, and I was present numerous times during their violent disputes. But on the evening of May 4th, 2023, my dad went too far. While they were arguing very violently, he started threatening to kill my mom and became uncontrollable. When he took a baseball bat and began to hit my mom, I had to make a very difficult decision. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and then rushed at my enraged dad, stabbing him 4 times. He stopped immediately, and my mom was able to protect herself. The emergency services arrived soon after, and my dad was seriously injured in the chest. However, they were able to do what was necessary to save him. After that, my dad was taken into custody for his repeated death threats towards my mom and the acts of violence he had committed against her. Since I was under 13 years old at the time of the incident, I'm considered legally presumed irresponsible under the French Juvenile Justice Code. So, do you think I did the right thing?
This woman mysteriously vanished whilst working as a Lyft driver. 33-year-old Ella Goody disappeared on March the 9th, 2022. Ella from Louisiana had had a tough childhood but made some great friends in a home for troubled teens. From a young age, she looked after her disabled mother, and friends said no matter what she went through, she had a good spirit. Early in 2022, Ella was actually looking for work, so her friend suggested she should start working for Lyft. She took on the job and started earning money and was enjoying it. However, she decided she could make more money working without the help of the app, so she started doing Lyfts unofficially. This essentially meant that she earned more money because the company didn't take a percentage of the profits. Her friend Felicia spoke to Ella just one day before she vanished. She then rang her the next day and didn't get a reply. Concerned, Felicia rang one of Ella's teenage children, and they hadn't seen their mum either. She told them that she was just going to do a trip to Texas and then she would be back. However, Ella was never seen again. Ella's black Audi was found 13 hours away in St. Joseph, Missouri. On May the 3rd, police stated that based on witness statements, it had been turned from a missing persons investigation into a homicide investigation. As of yet, Ella's body has not been discovered and nobody has been charged in connection to the homicide investigation.
This college baseball player was playing Pokemon Go when someone walked up behind him and murdered him. And still, to this day, no one has been arrested for this crime. So this is Calvin Riley. He was 20 years old when he was killed, and he was a rising star in the college baseball world. So at about 10 p.m. on August 6, 2016, Calvin was out in a place called Ghirardelli Square in San Francisco. On that evening, he was just out and about with a friend playing Pokemon Go on his phone. And if you don't know what Pokemon Go is, it's basically an app or a game that leads you around town and encourages you to explore your environments to find Pokemon. So on that day, Calvin's friend heard a gunshot, and he turned and watched Calvin fall to the ground while somebody ran away. Now, what's really puzzling about this case is that Calvin wasn't robbed. He still had his phone and everything was still in his wallet at the time that he was murdered, so nobody knows exactly why he was shot. So some people, including Calvin's father, believe this wasn't a random killing, that Calvin had a hit on his back that night and someone had carried out this hit and murdered his son. Witnesses have also claimed that they saw a man nearby the park watching people as they walked around that evening. And Calvin's friend even said that they passed right by this suspicious man at one point. But nobody has ever been able to identify this person, and there's still no real motive in Calvin's death. I'm really hoping that this case gets solved one day because this is extremely tragic and it's puzzling, and there's a killer out there in San Francisco walking amongst people, and nobody knows exactly who he is or what he's done.
Welcome to a new series called Celebrities with Cult Ties. Today we're talking about Tom Cruise, Scientology, and the girlfriend they basically held hostage for him. So in 2004, the Scientologists held auditions for a fake movie with the goal of finding a new girlfriend for Tom Cruise after his divorce from Nicole Kidman. Actresses would show up thinking they were auditioning for a real movie, but then be asked weird questions like, what do you think of Tom Cruise? That's how it was decided that Nazanin Boniadi was actually going to be Tom's new girlfriend. She was already a Scientologist, which they liked, but they made her do insane things. She apparently wore braces before she was dating Tom, and they made her take them off early. She also already had a boyfriend who she was planning on marrying, but they showed her recordings of his private auditing sessions in order to get her to break up with him. Auditing is like therapy coupled with Catholic confession where they ask you really invasive questions. I would know. I got audited one time. For the first 3 weeks they dated, she was not allowed to see anyone, not even her parents. And if she said something Tom didn't like, he would send her to get audited. It was reported that she would spend up to 3 hours a day with auditors purging her negative thoughts about Tom. The relationship was really short-lived because she actually ended up offending David Miscavige, the head of the Scientology organization, while she was dating Tom. And they sent another Scientologist to break up with her on behalf of Tom because he couldn't even see her. After that, they sent her to Scientology jail down in Florida, where her punishment was to scrub bathrooms on her hands and knees with a toothbrush and to dig ditches in the middle of the night. Nazanin went on to leave Scientology, and I imagine is living a much better life for it, but this gives a lot of context to his other relationships. We're talking about celebrities that have ties to cults, and today we're talking about Elvis Presley and his time at the Self-Realization Fellowship. The Self-Realization Fellowship is a non-denominational spiritual hub in Los Angeles that focuses on meditation and yoga, and Elvis would get pretty involved with it whenever he'd come to LA. Actually so involved that he became friends with the president, Daya Mata, and even told her that he wanted to start his own commune and eventually become a spiritual leader within the organization. But let's take a look at what the organization was actually teaching. The fellowship was started by Paramahansa Yogananda, who's actually credited with bringing yoga to the West in the early 1900s. And he unfortunately had some cult leader-esque qualities about him. Yogananda believed he was a god. He thought he had the same consciousness as Krishna and Jesus Christ, which that's basically chapter 1 in the Cult Leader Handbook, and if anyone tells you they're a god, run. Yogananda also told his followers that his yoga was scientifically proven to stop your body's decay and progress your natural evolution, which later on in Elvis's life, as his mental and physical health started declining, I can understand the appeal. Started circulating about Yogananda's inappropriate conduct with young girls, and it was pretty well known that very young Mormon girls were leaving their religion to come study at the fellowship, which is actually also the story with Daya Mata, as she was only 14 years old when she joined. It was also said that the initiation for these young girls was very inappropriate, involving hot tubs, scantily clad minors, and lots of inappropriate touching. Yogananda died over 10 years before Elvis even joined the organization, so it's unclear how much of this he actually knew when he was becoming a part of it. And later in his life, Elvis's spirituality was all over the place. His bodyguard even came out and said that Elvis at one point thought he had superpowers. Ultimately, he never became a leader within the Self-Realization Fellowship, but he stayed in contact with Diamata until he passed away.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there. This is Rolf Harris, one of the most disgusting celebrity pedophiles in Australian history. This story is really disturbing, so a trigger warning, viewer discretion is advised. So Rolf was a very, very famous figure in Australia. He often used instruments like the didgeridoo in his music, and he released a number of hit singles. That's how his career in media started. Soon enough, though, he elevated from music to TV, and he started hosting television programs. These programs included shows like Rolf's Cartoon Club, a show that was widely watched by children. Keep in mind, all these programs he was involved with were broadcast on BBC. And this guy was like mega famous. He was the first artist to play a concert in the new concert hall of the Sydney Opera House. And at some point in his career, he started painting. And in 2005, he actually painted an official portrait of Queen Elizabeth. I don't know how these guys with royal connections always end up being pedophiles, but they do. So ironically and disturbingly, at one point, Rolf hosted a television program for children called Kids Can Say No, which warned children between the ages of 5 to 8 about child SA and how to escape an attacker. Little did the producers know that at that same time they were filming that program, he was committing atrocious acts against kids. So it looked like Rolf was going to die a hero, up until Jimmy Savile was busted. Now, if you'll remember, I did a TikTok about Jimmy Savile. That guy was incredibly deplorable and disgusting. But as part of the same operation that snagged Savile, Rolf Harris was also captured. So in 2014, Rolf Harris was charged with 9 counts of assaulting children between the ages of 14 and 16. And he was also charged with 4 counts of possessing or viewing CP images. Apparently, when detectives had searched his electronic devices, they found 33 indecent images of minors. And this was just the end for Rolf. Charges just kept being brought up, charges against children, teenagers, adults. And it seemed like throughout his entire life, Rolf had been steadily assaulting young women, even assaulting children without any sort of recourse. He was eventually convicted and shockingly only served 3 years in prison. And just this year in May, he died. I personally find it disgusting that so many times when I cover stories like this, these famous predators, even older people, get really light sentences, especially in other countries. And if all this really did happen, he should have been in prison until he died, but that's just my opinion.
This man got his face eaten off by another man, and whatever you do, don't look up the video or picture. On May 26, 2012, Rudy Eugene, who was on the left, attacked and maimed Ronald Papo, who was on the right, who was a homeless man in Miami, Florida. During the 18-minute-long filmed encounter, Eugene accused Papo of stealing his Bible, beat him unconscious, removed Papo's pants, and bit most of Papo's face off, including his eyes, leaving him blind in both eyes. Eugene then became known as the Miami Zombie, and he was fatally shot by police that day. On the morning of May 26, 2012, 31-year-old Rudy Eugene drove to Miami Beach, who was completely naked at this time, encountered 65-year-old Ronald Papo at approximately 1:55 p.m. Ronald Papo had been lying underneath the elevator Metro Mover when Eugene began to pummel him. He then stripped him of his pants and bit him in the face. A guy riding his bike rode by all of this happening and called 911 to alert the authorities. A few minutes later, the authorities arrived, and after double-checking the spectacle that was in front of them, they warned Eugene to stop attacking Papo. Eugene ignored the officers' warnings and instead growled at them like a dog, and then resumed biting off Papo's face. The attack ended at 2:13 p.m. when Officer Ramirez shot Eugene once, which proved ineffective, and then he shot him another 4 times. This whole ordeal was captured on security cameras, and you can literally watch the entire 18-minute attack. After all of this happened, Ronald Papo was admitted to the hospital in critical condition, with 75 to 80% of his face above the beard completely missing. He underwent facial reconstruction surgeries that took months to complete, but he remained permanently disfigured and blind. Ronald Papo lost his eyebrows, his nose, parts of his forehead and cheek, and his left eye, and was left totally blind due to the damage to his remaining right eye. He underwent numerous surgeries to repair the damage to his face, and after rehabilitation, He put on 50 pounds and relearned how to dress, feed himself, shower, and shave. I feel so bad for Ronald Poppo, and I can't believe this even happened. This whole case seems out of a video game, and I can't believe it's real. Whatever you do, don't look up the aftermath photos or the video of this happening because it's absolutely disturbing and I bet you don't want to see it. But yeah, that's the case of the Miami zombie.
This case is literally the stuff of nightmares. This is Daniel LaPlante, and at just 16 years old, he terrorized 2 young girls while actually living in the walls of their home. Daniel was born in 1970 and had an extremely difficult upbringing. He was abused both sexually and psychologically by a lot of adults in his life, including his father, stepfather, and even his psychiatrist. His classmates described him as creepy and weird, and he was diagnosed with hyperactivity disorder, something that there was little support for in the 70s. At 16 years old, Daniel entered the home of the Bowen family in Townsend, Massachusetts. He'd become quite friendly with one of the daughters after phoning the house and striking up conversations with her over the phone before finally meeting face to face. She'd actually become really uneasy with Daniel as he had found out that her mother had died of cancer, and he was asking really inappropriate questions like had she suffered near the end and how it had made her feel. She cut contact, thinking that that was the last that she'd see of Daniel, but he managed to enter the home, cut a hole behind the dresser, and live in the walls of their house. While the girl's father was at work, they decided to use a Ouija board to try and contact their mother. Daniel, seeing this, decided to play tricks on them and began tapping from inside the walls. The girls told their father, who just thought they were playing silly games, and the next time he went out to work, the tapping started again. This time they found a message written on the wall in what they thought was blood, saying, "I'm in your bedroom, come and find me." It completely freaked the girls out. They ran across the road to a neighbour's house, who then called their father, and he came home and again thought it was the girls playing tricks. Shockingly, this went on for almost a year, before finally the father came home one day to find the house completely ransacked, and Daniel was standing in the corner of the room in the mother's wedding dress with makeup on his face and holding a hatchet. The father managed to chase him out of the house and he went missing. Daniel was eventually found, but he was only given a light sentence for breaking and entering, and he was soon released. This is where the story gets even more horrific. On December 1st, 1987, Daniel entered the home of the Gustafson family. Priscilla Gustafson, who was actually pregnant with her 3rd child, was raped by Daniel and then shot multiple times at point-blank range. Daniel then turned his attention to the 2 children in the house, 7-year-old Abigail and 5-year-old William. They were both drowned by Daniel in separate bathrooms. The father then came home from work to find his whole family murdered. It didn't take the police long to link Daniel to the murders, and a manhunt began, and just 48 hours he was spotted by a member of the public, who recognised him from a police photo, and he was found hiding in a dumpster. A hair belonging to Abigail Gustafson was found on Daniel's clothing, and it confirmed to the police that they had their killer. A year later, Daniel was sentenced to 3 life sentences for the murders of Priscilla, Abigail and William. This is Daniel now. He's appealed his sentence multiple times and it's been denied every single time, and he still remains behind bars.
This is one of the worst true crime cases I ever covered, and this is a massive trigger warning. In 2007, the boy on the right named Gabriel Kuhn, who was 12 years old, was killed by Daniel Petrie, who was 16, and on the left. Daniel Petrie and Gabriel Kuhn became good friends and began playing an online role-playing game called Tibia. At one point of the game, Gabriel asked Daniel for 20,000 virtual cash to clear the stage. Gabriel borrowed money from Daniel to use in the game and then refused to pay him back. Gabriel then blocked Daniel on everything, and this made him furious, and he went to Gabriel's house to pay him a visit. A couple of days before the murder, Daniel called the home phone of Gabriel and his mom answered. She explained that she would be out of town and that her son would be home alone if they wanted to play, completely unaware of the boys falling out. And on August 23rd, 2007, Daniel went to Gabriel's house and knocked on the door. Nobody answered, and Daniel kept knocking, but eventually Gabriel started speaking to Daniel through the door. Daniel told Gabriel to unlock the door and let him in, and if he apologized to him, everything would be fine. Believing this, Gabriel unlocked the door and let Daniel in. And after entering the house, Daniel locked the door behind him. Daniel then brutally assaulted Gabriel. Gabriel tried his best to defend himself, but he failed to do so. Daniel was older, bigger, and stronger. Gabriel was dripping in blood after being brutally beaten by Daniel. Daniel then laughed at the terrified Gabriel and took him to the bedroom, where he then sexually assaulted him. Gabriel cried, but this made Daniel even more cruel. After all of this, Gabriel threatened Daniel, saying he will tell his mother everything that happened, but this only made Daniel more mad. And in a fit of rage, Daniel took a cord from a gaming console and wrapped it around Gabriel's neck and strangled him with it until he went limp. Daniel assumed Gabriel was dead, and believing this, Daniel tried to move and hide the body in the crawlspace leading to the bedrooms. However, the body was too heavy, and after realizing this, Daniel searched the house for sharp tools, and eventually he found a kitchen knife and a hacksaw. Daniel then returned to Gabriel's body, and in order to make it lighter, he took the knife and hacksaw and began cutting at the top of Daniel's leg to remove it, and as Daniel cut into Gabriel's leg, he woke up. Gabriel wasn't dead. He let out a blood-curdling scream, but Daniel restrained him, making sure to twist and turn the blade to make it even more painful. Eventually, Daniel dismembered his right leg and moved to his left. And after severing both of his legs, Gabriel passed away. His autopsy suggested he was still alive throughout the whole ordeal, and he eventually died from shock and blood loss. After Daniel finished the dismemberment, he tried to hide the body again, and he wrapped a cable and wire around Gabriel's body. But the body was still too heavy, and Daniel then fled the house. Gabriel's body was discovered by his brother, and the body was left by the hallway door and the legs and the hacksaw too. Daniel Petrie was admitted to a juvenile center in September 2007 to only 3 years. This is due to Brazil's laws of sentencing minors. And to make you realize how evil Daniel was, when the judge asked him if he had any last words of remorse, Daniel said this: "Gabriel was a coward and a thief. He burns in hell right now where I sent him. And when I die, I will find him in hell and finish my revenge." It's also worth saying that the photos of the crime and Gabriel's body have surfaced on the internet, and nobody knows how they got there. I highly recommend not to look at them due to the graphic nature of them, and they will definitely be the worst crime scene photos you will ever see. It's honestly insane how Daniel is walking free today. May Gabriel rest in peace.
There has been an absolutely horrific murder this week that was live streamed on Instagram. This case is extremely disturbing, so please be warned before watching. On Friday, 12,000 people watched a Bosnian bodybuilder kill his wife on Instagram Live. 35-year-old Nermin had been abusing his wife during their marriage, and the pair had a young child. On Friday morning, he took to Instagram Live to tell his followers that they could witness a live killing. Absolutely horrifically, he turns the camera to his ex, whose face is completely covered in blood and disfigured. He calls her a derogatory name and blames her for her own death because she reported him to police. Disturbingly, you can hear the child crying in the background. He then tells his followers that he's the child's father and his ex had hidden the toddler from him for over a week and reported him to police for DV. So, in my opinion, yes, she's taking steps to keep her and her child safe from you. After shooting his wife in the head on Instagram, he then goads his followers saying, "Someone come and save the child." A police chase then began and he went on a shooting rampage. He continued to film and tells his viewers that he's killed 2 other people who actually turned out to be an innocent man and his young son. He also wounded a police officer, another man and a woman while on the run. He ended up unaliving himself on the same day.